participants in the course what to do if somebody is going through a mental health crisis or a mental health emergency. The best analogy out there is what we call the airplane analogy with the air mask. We need to role model healthy behaviors. The more we practice it, the easier it will become.
To strengthen your mind to be consistent. Captain Picard comes and says, like, on Starship Enterprise, no one is alone.
Conversations in your mind, obviously no one hears it. So it's like,
I've listened to this podcast and I'm deciding I want to try showing myself some self-compassion and showing myself and starting a self-care regime. Question is, how sustainable is that? And jumping into the pool, just get those toes wet and see what that looks like.
that first step can be so intimidating, can be so overwhelming to have, so much information or no information at all,
Called the listening characteristics. And there's an acronym I like to use, which is called GEENA, which is spelled GEENA. And if you can be GEENA with someone else, well, you can create safety and you can create comfort in that environment.
People just want to come in and talk, and being able to, like, the art of active listening.
Out of here and into here and out there, right? I am plugged in and
We're all good.
perfect.
So we'll get started.
Hey, the official start to our podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of our limited series podcast, Half Full. Half Full is a podcast that aims to inform and empower people to take the first step in their mental health journey. We want to help facilitate those important conversations about mental health, whether it be about self-care, general well-being, or just some more serious topics like mental illness. So we understand how overwhelming it can be just to try and figure out where to start when it comes to mental well-being. And so our goal really is to educate people and about mental health and encourage them to take action in real life. So my name is Sarah McCourt, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Peer Support Center at McGill University, and I will be one of our hosts for today's episode.
So welcome to our special podcast. Thank you, Sarah. I'm Gaurav Singh, entrepreneur, sports coach, and sports president, UBC SOTA. And today we have a very special guest. He has been working in the mental health area for over a decade and has helped thousands of people face their issues and live better lives. Nationally recognized mental health professional, Center for Addiction and Mental Health Difference Maker Award achiever, mental health first aider, and a provisional psychologist, Al Visram. Welcome, Al. How are you doing today? And why don't you give a quick introduction to all the viewers who are seeing you for the first time? And yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody, and welcome to all the listeners who are tuning in today. My name is Al, and I'm a registered provisional psychologist practicing here in Edmonton, Alberta. And currently I work in part-time in private practice, where I work with clients from basically all walks of life. And then I also work part-time with the Canadian Mental Health Association, specifically in suicide bereavement. So that's a little bit about me and what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
Awesome. So why don't we start with, like, how did you get into this field? Like, were you from the very beginning had a clear vision of this is the area you will serve, or there was some turning point that said, okay, we need to address these services. The world needs these services at this point. So it was a clear path, or there was some turns, or there was some turning point in your life that made you get into this profession, serve mental health clients, and how was your journey about it?
Yeah, good question. Where to begin? So probably my journey into mental health started probably around 2010, so 12 years ago now. And I was in a different profession. I was working in the recreation department for a local municipality, and I was an aquatic manager managing one of the aquatic facilities. And so completely different role, but in that role, I had multiple opportunities to kind of engage with different staff members and support people in different ways. And my career or turning point into mental health started with joining the local peer support team. So being able to join in a peer support team for employees, that started my kind of passion and my drive to say, hey, I like this kind of work. And people are responding to this kind of work, and there's a need for this kind of work. And so that led to me becoming a mental health first aid instructor in 2012, I think, somewhere around there. Started teaching that course, and from then on, I spent a couple more years teaching mental health first aid, doing various mental health education sessions, continuing with peer support, getting training in critical incident stress management, and then from there, I said, hey, you know what? I think I want to go back to school. So in 2018, I quit my job. I went back to school full time, got my master's in counseling, and then here I am today. So that was a quick 12-year journey in the last, in the last minute or so.
And Sarah right here, she's also like she's a vice chair at the Peer Support Center at McGill University. So she's in a similar yeah.
Yeah, I definitely I've learned a lot, like just like you're just talking about like your experience with like just going into like your career with mental health, and it can be like a very personal journey in terms of like whenever you find the kind of the drive to do it, you just like find that passion. So it's really nice to see how you like translated and kind of that 180 to go back to school and to follow through with all of that.
Yeah, thank you. And so Sarah, it sounds like you have you understand kind of the value of peer support and what that can kind of offer the community and kind of the value of that.
Oh, absolutely. And also I was like reading up on like mental like health first aid, because at first I was like, it's obviously the first aid part is like a very physical, like the physical safety, like you were saying, at the pool, like the making sure everything's good, but then expanding that definition of safety to include mental health. Like how did that happen? What brought you to really to broaden it, I guess?
Yeah, so I think the biggest turning point for me was I think similar to a lot of people who end up finding their passion in different ways. For me, it was somebody, I guess you could call her my mentor. She saw the value in the work that I was doing, and so she was the one who was currently in the organization that I was working with, who said, "Hey, Al, you need to go take this training. You need to become an instructor. You need to do this." And I listened to her. I trusted her. I valued her opinion. And so she kind of guided me through that process. And there was that trust there because I was young and didn't know it's a big step to kind of go do these things and take a little bit of a risk. And so she's the one who kind of guided me to becoming a mental health first aid instructor and getting the training done to become an instructor. And then from there, it was about pushing and advocating to say, hey, this training is valuable. This training is important. And it can be used for any population, whether it's a workplace, whether it's instructors or lifeguards at a pool. Physical safety and physical first aid is 100% important, but so is our mental health. And that's kind of where the mental health first aid piece kind of came in. I'll be honest, it started with a lot of kind of advocating to recognize and say, hey, this is important. And once you get a few people on the train or on track, then more and more people start to see the value, and then they start advocating for it, right? So really it's just about getting the first few people recognizing that value and getting them kind of hooked on or on track, and then they start doing a lot of that advocacy work for you and with you.
The little snowball effect of it getting bigger and bigger. Yeah,
totally. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in the community now, especially since COVID has hit. And in the last few years, mental health has been really kind of on the forefront over the last couple of years now, right? And we're seeing that snowball effect pretty powerfully right now.
Yeah, that's true. Like it says, like you have to take the unconventional step, and then the world follows. And that's the need of the hour, because these days we can see the rising number of these things in Gen Zs also. We'll touch upon that later. But as you said about mental health first aid, not a lot of people know about it, and you're a nationally recognized mental health first aider who has taught several people. So why don't we first educate the viewers about what mental health first aid is? How is it useful? How can we get this done? And who should really do this, take this course, and like general awareness about what mental health first aid is?
Sure. So yeah, Gaurav, amazing question. And I'm glad you asked that because you're right. I still come across people. I've been teaching this course since 2012, and yet I still come across people who don't know what this course is. So the mental health first aid course is a course that was designed by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. So they're the ones who have created this course. It's their course, and they train instructors like myself across the country to facilitate their course. So basically, it's a course that's, as the name suggests, it's what to do in a mental health crisis. So the analogy I like to use is, a lot of people know what physical first aid is. So in physical first aid, if somebody's out there and they're hurt, their body is hurt, whether it's a broken bone or they're in shock or something like that, a physical first aider is there to help provide that immediate support until professional help can take over, until the ambulance arrives, right? And so mental health first aid is very similar in the sense that we treat or we teach people, participants in the course, what to do if somebody is going through a mental health crisis or a mental health emergency. What is the help they can provide in that moment until appropriate professional help can take over? And so whether that looks like a psychologist, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, whatever that professional help might look like, mental health first aid is that initial support that we can provide people who may be going through a mental health crisis or a mental health emergency. So I'm going to ramble a little bit here, so please interrupt me if I start going on too much, because I have a lot to say about this.
We want you to go on.
We're happy to hear it. We're happy to hear it.
So to answer your second question, which was, who is this course for? Well, the course is for anybody and everybody who wants to have a deeper understanding of mental health, how it can impact other people, how it impacts individuals in their daily lives. The mental health first aid course not only is about helping other people, but there's a strong component on personal wellness and personal mental health.
Right.
And so participants in the course also learn about and are taught the importance and the value of self-care and the importance and the value of looking after yourself. And if you want to help someone else, well, you got to make sure you're doing okay before you reach out and help someone else, right? And so really the value is limitless in my opinion in terms of who could access and who would be a good fit to take this course. The last piece that I want to mention is the course is really powerful in helping reduce the stigma surrounding mental health. The more people who take the course, who learn about mental health, who learn about mental illness, the more people who talk about things, the fact that we're doing this podcast and hopefully a lot of people will be able to access this, all of these things help reduce the stigma surrounding mental health. It gets the conversations going so that we can talk about it and so that more people who need to access mental health services feel safer to do so.
Yeah.
Right. That's really, I like because for me in my mind, it's like some part of it is reducing the stigma, but like normalizing as well that like everyone has mental health, everyone has like, and whether it's, sometimes you're not doing so well, sometimes you're doing well, but like just the fact that having this training of, like you're saying, it's kind of bridging like you would for physical health, getting until the appropriate people are able to come and assist further. But just the fact that it kind of is making it a bit more normal to be able to respond to these situations. I really like that part of it.
Totally, you're spot on there. And once we can create more of that normalcy around it, well, a lot of people don't have stigma when they want to go to the hospital or need to go to the ER for some reason, but their physical body is hurting, right? So hopefully we'll get to that stage or that point where people can access a mental health specialist or a professional when they need a little bit of help.
Yeah. And also I wanted to go back a little bit to like the self-care aspect that you brought up, because I know for me, a big thing, I at the Peer Support Center, a big thing we tell our volunteers is like, obviously you're supporting people, but like you also need support. It's not because you've received all this training or you're, more aware than the average person on certain topics that you wouldn't need training yourself or that you can't be going through a more difficult time yourself. And so I think that especially with mental first aid, like, can you just expand a little bit more on like what role self-care does play in mental first aid in terms of being the supporter?
Yeah, 100%. So really the best, and I'm sure some of your viewers and listeners may be familiar with this analogy, and the two of you may be familiar with it as well, but the best analogy out there is what we call the airplane analogy with the air masks. Have you guys heard of that before?
Yes, I think a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. You have it. Okay. So basically what the analogy says is, if you're on a plane and the air masks come down, the air hostesses or they will tell you this, like, put your own mask on first before you help the person beside you. Even if the person beside you is your child or a relative or a best friend, you put that mask on first. And the reason being is that if you can't breathe, how are you going to help the person beside you? But if you can breathe, well, now you can help the person beside you, you can help the person behind you, you can help the person in front of you, and everybody else, right? And so the same thing is true when it comes to people who are in a supporting role, right? If your mental wellness is up here, well, you're going to be in a better capacity to help more people. Or the other analogy we use is like filling your bucket. If your bucket is full, well, then you have something to give. If your bucket is empty, what do you have to give to those people around you? And when I'm talking about giving, I'm talking about a listening ear. I'm talking about that support. I'm talking about that compassion. I'm talking about that empathy, right? And that's a really key component when it comes to supporting and helping other people. Now, the biggest battle that we have is that there's a little bit of a stigma that self-care is selfish, that looking after ourselves isn't right, that other people are more important than the self, right?
Right.
And so if we can challenge that a little bit to recognize that self-care is not selfish, that self-care is a vital, important component of supporting others, well, then we create an even more powerful community of supporters.
Yeah, you know what? And adding to that, I was talking to a psychologist the other day in which he was sharing a story in which a person was about like, how do I spread happiness? So the answer was, you don't have to spread happiness. If you're happy inside, you're automatically spreading happiness. So you have to be happy first, and then only you would be able to spread happiness to the people around you. So you have to first take care of yourself, and then only in a way, automatically you're spreading happiness everywhere you go. So it's like it comes from the internal source, right?
It does.
Yeah.
And Gaurav, that's a really important story and a really powerful story, because it goes on this idea of role modeling. We need to role model healthy behaviors. If you want to role model happiness to others, and if that's what you want to do is help other people be well and happy around you, well, we have to role model it and show it ourselves first.
That's
right? And so really powerful analogy that you have there for sure.
Right. Yeah, and thank you. And yeah, any other question you have, Sarah, about mental health first aid, about what my viewers have or you have?
Yeah, I honestly I'm still on the self-care part, because that's something like you were saying, that it's so like it's kind of ironic how like self-evident it is that like if you don't, like you're saying, like the bucket analogy, or just like the plane analogy, it's like if you're not in, you don't have the capacity to help someone else, because you're not taking care of yourself, how are you supposed to provide that support? And I'm always kind of baffled as someone who has had that thought before of like, putting others before you, that, taking care of yourself and like kind of undoing those connections in your mind that it is selfish or something like that. Like, I think I've come to understand a lot how like the self-awareness is also part of self-care. And I can also see, especially with like your work with like mental first aid, how you must like see very challenging situations, or even with some more of your the areas that you specialize in, so like in grief, loss support, like anxiety and depression, like all of that, like obviously going through it is very difficult, but being that person that support is also a challenge in and of itself, to be able to take care of yourself, like understanding, you know, or seeing something really difficult, you know.
You got it, definitely. And so, you know, it's that I love that languaging you're using, which is that self-awareness.
Yeah.
Because without it, we're not going to know what our mind and our body needs from us.
Yeah.
And we never want to underestimate the impact of supporting another individual, right? Showing compassion and empathy to another human being, it does take a toll on us. And without that self-awareness, how are we supposed to know what our body needs to kind of recharge, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, and like one more question, like people know this, but though they are not able to put themselves first, and this is a real problem. So what practical tip would you give to a person who is aware of this but is not able to put himself first? You get my point? Because as a sports coach, many players come and they're like, they want to get their thing straight in first, but it's like they have so much, they just can't put themselves first. So what practical tip would you give to them to start, basically by baby steps, what practice they should take, or how should they go about it?
Excellent question. And I think the best first step is just to be open to trying it, and being open and going at it with that idea that if we want to help others, well, we need to, again, going back to that idea of role modeling, right? That we need to role model healthy behaviors for ourselves. And so if we truly want to be in that support role for others, it's okay that we access, so, you know, we were talking about Sarah's peer support team, those members may access peer support themselves, and that's okay, right? And so being open to those kinds of things and being open-minded and saying, hey, in order to be a good support for others, we need to role model what good support looks like and what that means. How can we expect other people to take care of themselves and to reach out for extra help if we ourselves aren't doing that, right? If we're not going to do it, how can we expect other people to do it? So to answer your question specifically, I think the good first step is just to be open-minded and to be open to trying it. And self-care doesn't have to look like, you know, an hour a day. It could literally happen 30 seconds, right? 30 seconds a day, close your eyes, take a moment to say, hey, what do I need in this moment right now? Practice that self-awareness, practice taking a little bit of time for ourselves, and just see where that goes. And my challenge would be, you know, if you don't see a difference, well, then you can stop, right? But if you do see a difference, well, let's make that skill, let's build that muscle, make it a little bit stronger, make that skill a little bit stronger, and then kind of go from there, right? And can I share one more analogy with the two of you and all of our viewers?
Oh, absolutely.
So the other analogy, I use this with my clients all the time, is this idea of a battery, of our mental wellness battery. And at the end of the day, we all have one of these in our pocket. Some of us have more than one of these in our pockets. I've got 3 of them sitting on my desk right here, right? In order for those phones to work, we need to plug them in and they need to have power. They need to charge, right? And so our mental wellness and our ability to show compassion and empathy and support to others is also similar to that battery. It needs to have power in it in order to function, in order to be there. And the more you use it, the more you're supporting others, the more it's going to deplete. The faster it's going to drain. And so the question then becomes, what is your power source? What recharges your battery? Is it that 30-second self-care check-in? Is it that walk around the block? Is it going to see your own counselor or therapist? Right? Is it eating healthy foods? You know, what is it that is charging your wellness battery? Because it's going to be different for me, it's going to be different for the two of you, and it's going to be different from everybody else who's listening to this right now. Right? And The last piece of this analogy is recognizing that, well, sleep is an important component of recharging anybody's battery. But that self-awareness piece that Sarah, you were talking about, is recognizing you may not start at 100%. So before you go into a situation where you're helping people, that self-awareness is saying, okay, how much do I have to give? Am I at 60%? Am I at 70%? Am I at 20%? And that'll help guide you in terms of what you're able to give, what you need to do, and how you need to do it.
I think it's really, I really appreciate how you like highlighted like the fact that it's going to look so different for everyone. And that like we're like going back to that self-awareness that, and I really like the way that you said like it's a muscle, like, you know, like you're working it out. Cause like for me in my mind, I was thinking like working out is not always going to be like the most pleasant thing. It's going to be sometimes like, you know, you can have a bit of that dread when you get started. And that's like how, like, I would kind of like, I'm like connecting that with what you're saying is that if it is working for you, it, you know, you keep going and you build on it. But if it's not working, there's nothing wrong with moving on and doing something else that'll, you know, build the muscles a bit more effectively or something like that. I really like that.
Totally. Yeah, you got it.
Again, like being open to trying different things and finding your source of energy. And once you find it, it's just a matter of time. Once you see results, it becomes a habit and a lifestyle. And then you know where, then you go and like, this is my to go, this thing, I'll take a walk and then I'll solve this problem. That's, yeah.
Yes. And the end goal is self-care becomes just like any other habit that we have, whether it's brushing our teeth or taking the dog out for a walk, whatever it might be. The more we practice it, the easier it will become.
Yeah.
Right?
You know, addressing that, just like the point of we have to be consistent. For example, brushing your teeth. It's just 2 minutes in the morning, a 2 minute evening, night, right? It's not that 2 minutes that counts. It's that we do it every day that makes a difference, right? Because you can't be like, okay, I'll do 20 minutes of brushing on Saturday, that'll amount to the whole week. It's just that we're doing it every day that makes a difference. So the power of consistency that comes in, and a lot of people, including me, like to be consistent is one of the major challenges in life, right? In the first week, when you have the motivation, when you have the inspiration for the first few weeks, you'll be like, okay, 1-2 weeks will be fine. But then people lose their motivation and consistency falls. And so what advice would you give on like how to strengthen your mind to be consistent?
Good question. The first thing that came to my mind as I heard you talking was that, you know, is also being able to use a skill called self-compassion. Self-compassion is something that a lot of people really struggle with as well. And so recognizing that creating any kind of new habit or creating any kind of new consistency is challenging and it's hard and it's tough. And for us to be experts at it right away, not going to happen. And so to be compassionate or empathetic with ourselves, showing grace to ourselves is also a key component in this whole process. And it's actually a healthy part of self-care is recognizing that we're allowed to show ourselves a little bit of grace and a little bit of self-compassion, right? But so that's the first thing. But the second thing is support. Yeah. Right. And when I talk about support, it's about asking whether the languaging I use is what I call who is in your sphere of influence. So a sphere of influence are people that are kind of really close to you. They could be family members, they could be significant others, they could be partners, they could be anybody who's kind of close within your sphere of influence. Ask for some support and say, hey, can you help keep me accountable? Help keep me on track, right? This is what I want to do. I want to start with 30 seconds a day or 30 seconds a week, whatever it might be. And let me report that to you so that I can talk about it, right? One of the key things is being able to express and talk about what we're doing and how we're doing it and the impact we're having on it. That's a really powerful way to not only keep ourselves accountable, but to help give ourselves some clarity in terms of what's working and what's not working. And so reaching out to your sphere of influence to say, this is what I want to try. I've listened to this podcast and I'm deciding I want to try showing myself some self-compassion and showing myself and starting a self-care regime, right? So start small and then be able to express that and talk about it with other people, or create a challenge to have other people do it with you, right? That's another really powerful way to kind of do things, because when we do things alone, humans don't like to be alone, right? And so when we do things alone or in isolation, it becomes a little bit harder. But when we do things as part of a community, it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think externalizing it a little bit, like it's very easy to have all those conversations in your mind. Obviously, no one hears it. So it's like if you're not following through or anything like that, it's a lot easier to like lose track and kind of let it fall through the cracks. So I like bringing other people in. I can see how that really is like super effective in terms of, and also just in the sense that you see that like other people like want to like better certain parts of themselves, like, and you're doing that all together. So it's like acknowledging that there's like a little bit of growth to do or growth, and it's like a lot less intimidating. And again, like normalizing a little bit more that it's you're constantly going to be like learning different parts, like, you know what I mean? Like different self-care regimes, different part, understanding yourself, like continuously growing. So it's good to have the other people part of that as well.
Definitely. And one more key thing there is, trying new things. Don't be afraid to try new things. You'll find some things that work for you, but you'll also find things that don't work for you. And those things that don't work for you, well, now you know that's not part of my self-care regime. That's not what I want to do. That reminds me of one time I went on, I found I don't know if Groupon still exists, but this is years ago. I found a Groupon it was called a Tibetan sound massage. And so I said, hey, this sounds cool. And so I went and thinking I'm going to try something new. And so I went and I tried it. And I came out of there with more of a headache than when I went in. And so for me, that did not work. For a lot of other people, that's going to be what works for them. And that's going to be really relaxing and really powerful for them. But for me, didn't work for me. But now I know, right? Yeah. And so trying new things.
Just like Nikola Tesla said, it's like I just found like 500 ways that did not work. I didn't fail 500 times. I just found these are the things that won't work. Now, for the 500 first time, I did try this thing. So yeah.
You got it. And that increases our self-awareness. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll take it forward now. And yeah, so while doing our research, we found that you're a Star Trek geek, and you've pointed out to one of the scenes in which when Jeremy loses his parents, Captain Picard comes and says, like, on the Starship Enterprise, no one is alone. And you pointed out that factor of loneliness back that was pointed it was shot in 1989, so 90s, early 90s. So there are several researches also about the relation between loneliness and depression, loneliness and anxiety, loneliness and self-esteem. And I was just going through the longest running study on happiness. That is the Harvard's 84-year-old study of adult development by Robert Waldinger. He's a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, and the psychiatric professor at Harvard Medical. So he quotes, loneliness kills. It is as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. So in this section of the podcast, we would address about what are the root causes of loneliness? Why does it arise? Because, a couple of times there are people who are surrounded by a lot of people who are in relationships. They're also still lonely. So why does loneliness arises? What are the root causes of it?
So first of all, well done on your research. I don't know how you knew about that quote, and I actually have it framed in my office right over there.
Searches.
Yeah. It is a very powerful quote, but to start by answering your question, I need to kind of preface the fact that first of all, I'm not a researcher, and I'm not the expert when it comes to loneliness. So take everything I say with a little bit of salt, basically, that this is just from my perspective and from my experience working with my clients and working with people in the community. Okay. But loneliness is a really real thing. And there's a lot of truth to this idea that to be alone doesn't mean that we're physically alone. You can be surrounded by people and still feel alone. And so from my perspective and from my experience, what it comes down to is, do we feel safe and comfortable enough to let other people in? And when people don't feel safe and comfortable to let people in, so I'm talking about the situation where somebody is surrounded by others, whether it's their partners or their family, whatever it might be. So physically you're not alone, but if we don't feel safe and comfortable to let people in, or to express what's going on in here and to be able to express that to other people, well, for all intents and purposes, we feel alone. When other people don't hear or don't want to hear what we have to say, or if we're not able to express how we feel, well, we're alone. And so that loneliness sometimes can be caused from a lack of safety, a lack of comfort, and sometimes from an increased amount of stigma. When we're worried about what other people are going to think of us, or what other people are going to feel about us, or what they're going to say about us, well, that's no longer a safe environment. And so we keep that stuff to ourselves. We keep it inside. And so that's a form of loneliness, which is keeping our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions within. And that's never a good idea, right? Now, with the caveat is that sometimes it's not safe. Sometimes it's a perceived lack of safety, but sometimes it's a real safety concern where a lot of people are struggling and they're not in a safe environment to be able to express or to be able to talk or to be able to reach out. And so sometimes loneliness is a protection mechanism where, because it's not safe, our mind and our body says, hey, it's safer to keep this in. And that's a form of protection that our body does for us to keep things inside. And until that environment changes, sometimes that's what that person might need, because it would be more unsafe for them to express or to share. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
yeah, it's really interesting to think of. Like, I've never thought of it as in terms of like it being a defense mechanism, like protecting your, like, because you're like it's you think about like how much, like Gaurav was saying, just like the links between like anxiety, depression, all that, and you think about kind of how it links to bad things or causes bad things, but I've never connected it with like a little bit of that safety aspect where it's like, no, I can't share how I'm feeling, or it is right now I need to keep things in. I never even thought about it like that.
Totally. And so for a lot of people out there, I in the best case scenario, yes, we're talking, we're expressing, we're sharing, but I don't know a lot of people who live in that best case scenario, right? A lot of people are in unsafe environments or are struggling, and so it's important that we just kind of capture that and recognize that, and especially for our viewers, because a lot of people who are listening to this may not be in a safe environment. They may be struggling alone, right? And so if anybody out there is kind of in that environment that's kind of struggling alone, my question is, how sustainable is that? And so it may be sustainable in the short term, but something needs to change. And so it's okay we know it's okay to reach out and ask for help, but sometimes that can be really scary, right? And so my encouragement is, take a small step. What does that small step look like? Does it mean calling a 24-hour crisis line, a distress line? Does it mean testing the waters and reaching out to a close friend or a different family member that might hear you out? And I'm not saying go and express and share everything that's going on for you. I'm saying get your toes wet. Before jumping into the pool, just get those toes wet and see what that looks like, right? And just test the waters a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting to think about, like, we're obviously, and I think that's part of why we wanted to do this podcast, or like with the website that goes along with it, is that first step can be so intimidating, can be so overwhelming to have, so much information or no information at all. There's two extremes there. but those small little steps, obviously looking different from everyone or for everyone, but just how crazy it can be to just get over that first hurdle. And then from there, everything else seems a lot more, or I shouldn't generalize like that, but just everything is a bit more attainable. And it's, it seems like less of an effort to go and seek out that help for a second time or a third time and keep going like that.
Yeah, that first step can be the most challenging. And when it comes to seeking professional help, like going to a therapist or a psychologist, that challenge is very real. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm prepping my clients for their very first session with me, that's one of the first things we kind of talk about over the phone is waiting in that waiting room or making that initial phone call to even set up the appointment. There's a lot of anxiety that comes along with that and a lot of fear that comes along with that, right? But it's like you said, Sarah, taking that first step, picking up that call, sending an email, right? Doing that first step is the hardest step. And once you've done it, everything else will kind of fall into place. And now you have a little bit of support to help you with the next steps, right?
Getting that guidance a little bit for sure.
Yeah.
And that's like really true. And people are doing that, but still, most of half the people are struggling to make that first step. And this is what this podcast is about, to create awareness and encourage them to take this first step. So when we spoke about loneliness, it's about not the ability or like not the safety to share your feelings. This maybe because you don't trust the other person, or you have the anxiety or the tension of what they might think about you. So this judgment. So what advice would you give? Because the viewers that are watching us, they make the environment. And what step can an average person do when a person comes to them and share these things? Because it comes down to trust issues and judgment, fear, right? What he might think about it, or whether he discloses it to other people or not. Will this thing be safe with the other person? So what advice would you give them, so that if this thing is followed, the society as a whole, the environment as a whole, everywhere gets better? Baby steps, but what advice would you give it?
So if I'm hearing correctly, Gaurav, I just want to confirm the question is, what advice would I give or encouragement would I give to somebody who's listening to someone else to create that safe environment, to create that safety?
That's right.
Okay. Excellent question. And the short answer, and I'll expand on this in just a moment, but the short answer is take the mental health first aid course, because that's exactly one of the things that we talk about in mental health first aid, which is how to create that safe, non-judgmental environment when we're listening to someone else. Okay. So let me give you a little bit of a taste of what we talk about in the mental health first aid course, and how we can create that safety. The first one, and the first thing that I really want to make very clear is you alluded to this idea of confidentiality, right? Of how are we going to make sure that whatever is said or disclosed doesn't get shared anywhere else? Well, the reality is that we never want to create 100% confidential space. Even when I'm seeing my clients, I can't guarantee that, right? Because if somebody's in imminent risk, or if somebody's at harm of hurting themselves or hurting someone else, well, we don't want to give that guarantee that we're going to keep things 100% confidential, because we may need to contact help or extra help if there's a risk of harm to the self or to others, right? And so first and foremost, it's about saying, hey, you know what? I will keep things confidential within the limits of the law, or I'll keep things confidential as long as I think that things are staying safe, and that you're safe, and that other people are safe, right? I've been in roles prior to being a provisional psychologist working with clients, but when I was in peer support, where people were at high risk of harming themselves, or had come to me to talk to me in a peer support capacity and were in progress of hurting or harming themselves. Well, in those cases, in those scenarios, I'm not going to keep things confidential, because I am going to get help for this individual, right? And so that's the first thing that we want to make sure that if anybody's kind of supporting someone else, it's just making sure that we need to make sure that safety is a number one priority, not only for ourselves, but for the person we're listening to, right? But here's kind of the quick, I'm going to use an old reference, but the Coles Notes version. I don't know if anybody knows that reference. The Coles Notes versions are like summaries from when I was a kid in school, but the Coles Notes versions of it is try and avoid using why questions. So as the active supportive listener, okay, try and avoid asking why. Why automatically implies a little bit of judgment, right? Why are you feeling that way? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Well, we don't want to put that person on the defensive, right? They don't need to justify why they're feeling a certain way, right? What's more important is that they're able to express how they're feeling.
Yeah.
The why, not as important. The more important thing is that they're able to be open and express it, okay? So try and avoid using why questions, okay? The second thing is, if possible, try avoid using shoulds. The analogy we like to use is stop shoulding on yourself and stop shoulding on other people. Now, I need to clarify, I didn't use a bad word there. If anybody needs to go back, I said should. Stop shoulding on yourself, okay? When we tell people what they should or shouldn't do, well, that implies that we have more knowledge about their experience and what's going on for them than they do. When in reality, that individual knows more about their own situation and what's best for them in that moment. So let them come up with what they need to do, what's best for them, okay? So avoid using whys, avoid using should. Then there's something called the listening characteristics. And there's an acronym I like to use, which is called GEENA, which is spelled GEENA. And if you can be GEENA with someone else, well, you can create safety and you can create comfort in that environment. So the G stands for be genuine. And genuine is huge. Genuine with yourself and genuine with the person. Part of being genuine is saying, hey, my battery is only at 20%, so I'm not the best person to help you right now. Let me find somebody else who can help, okay? Or being genuine is, yes, I'm in a good position. I'm here, I want to help. What can I do? Being genuine is saying, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here to listen, right? So being genuine with yourself of what you can do, being genuine with yourself with what you cannot do, and being genuine with yourself and recognizing that, hey, you don't have all the answers and you may not be there is no perfect person to help someone in all situations, right? So being genuine with yourself is probably the most important thing. So genuine. The second E stands for empowering. We want to try and empower the person to see what they need to do, okay? So empowerment can be really powerful. And it also helps that individual feel a little more self-confident and feel that they have the ability to make change in their life, right? So we really want to empower someone. That's where the shoulding comes in. If we should on other people, we take away their power, okay? So empowerment, huge. Genuine, empowerment. The second E stands for empathy. So showing empathy to an individual is a really powerful characteristic, okay? There's a time and place for sympathy, but there's also a time and place for empathy. When we're doing active supportive listening, when we're trying to create a safe space for someone else, we want to be empathetic. Now, I'm not going to describe what empathy is. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Brené Brown before and have seen that 3-minute video on YouTube. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to just Google into YouTube empathy versus sympathy and Brené Brown and watch her 3-minute video on empathy versus sympathy, because she does an amazing job talking about the differences between empathy and sympathy, okay? And so I'm going to leave the empathy piece there, and I'm going to encourage the viewers to go watch that video to find out more about that and the value and the importance of it. So we talked about the G, the first E, the second E. The N is about being non-judgmental. And the only way to be non-judgmental is if we recognize what are our judgments, what are our biases, and try and keep them out of the conversation. Now, nobody I know is 100% non-judgmental. If anybody comes up to you and says, "Oh, I'm 100% non-judgmental," I don't believe that exists. Okay, we all have preconceived biases and we all have judgments. That's just part of being human. Okay. The powerful piece is recognizing what are our judgments, what are our biases, and then go back to that genuine piece. Because of our judgments and our biases, does that mean I'm able to help this person? Or does that mean I'm not able to help this person? Okay. And if we're able to, the best thing in active supportive listening is being able to take those biases and those judgments, put them in a container and keep them out of the conversation. If you can do that in active supportive listening, well, that's how we become non-judgmental. If we recognize that we can't do that, then it goes back to being genuine and saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm not the best person to help this individual. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? The last piece of this acronym is the A. And the A stands for being assertive. Now, assertive doesn't mean being rude, but assertive means being assertive. And so what that means, what that looks like is, go back to that when we talked a little bit earlier about, that confidentiality piece and the risk of harm. Being assertive is potentially sounds like saying, hey, I'm really worried about you right now. And I'm worried that you need some extra help right now, that you're in an emergency situation. So I'm going to call for extra help. And the person may come back to you and say, no, please don't call for help. Like, I'm going to be okay. But assertive is saying, hey, you know what? No, I'm recognizing that I think you're in trouble. Okay. And I'm worried about your physical health, and I'm worried about your mental health. So let's get some help, or I'm going to call for help here. Okay. So we can be assertive while still being respectful. We can be assertive while still being empathetic, kind, and genuine.
Yeah.
Right. And so to recap quickly, it's about being genuine, empathetic, empowering, non-judgmental, and assertive. I hope that answers your question.
This is really insightful. Like this gives a framework, right? Sarah would agree. Like this gives a framework to anyone, because yeah, I was planning to get this question late, like the final one. We did a primary research in which we had a question like, if you were to reach out to support, who would it be? 34% said friends and 31% said family. And these are not experts, and these are not mental health first aiders. And many times the advice they give is not in the direction that is supposed to be. So this framework does provide them a lot of a thing to follow by, through which they would make sure that the conversation would be as appropriate.
I think also, like, kind of what I'm getting from this is that it sounds like the support is not, active listening is not always providing a solution. I think it's super easy to fall into that trap of like, you acknowledge that someone's in a crisis and you're like, solution, how do we get you out of this? But, and especially what I've learned with working at the peer support center is that sometimes some people just want to come in and talk, and being able to, like, the art of active listening is I can go on forever, but just the fact that like you're able to provide that safe environment, and like Gaurav was saying, the framework that you just provided, like that's a great first step, but it works for so much. And for smaller scenarios where someone just needs to talk, or like bigger scenarios where it does lead to those situations where you have to be more assertive in terms of following through with help. But not everything, like within that spectrum of situation, is going to require a solution. Not everyone that needs someone to actively listen to them needs a solution from that conversation, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And you're 100% spot on with that, right? Sometimes what I like to tell people is that human connection is so powerful. And sometimes just being with someone is exactly what the other person needs. We don't need to say anything. We don't need to do anything, but just by being with someone, well, that's really valuable. And sometimes that's what people need. Yeah. And so I remember I was teaching a mental health first aid course, and I have to give credit where credit's due. I didn't come up with this, but this was from a participant of mine probably about 10 years ago. And she said, Al, we're called human beings, but we should be called human doings, because we're always busy doing, that we never really take time to just be. Yeah. But if we're human beings, we should take time to just be, not only be with ourselves, but to be with other people. And And I think there's a lot of value in that, to kind of take a step back and saying, hey, it's okay for us to just be. And sometimes that's what other people need, is for us to just be with them.
Yeah.
Definitely the step back. The step back is valuable, especially because everyone's on the move constantly. And like we were saying earlier, it's very part of like the mental health first aid is being able to recognize when someone does have a declining mental health, or there are some issues that should be addressed. But yeah, like it's very interesting to just like think about how quickly things go and how easy it would be to not address these situations. And the purpose of the mental health first aid is having the tools to be able to have those conversations in, like you're saying, the most non-judgmental, supportive way, so that we're normalizing having those conversations, and we're also able to just like better support each other as a community, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
And I would agree with both of you, because many times what happens is while playing sports and coaching, many times players just need to get the thoughts in their mind just out. Just once they have the thoughts spoken out to someone, it's like, okay, they can see it themselves also. It's just the challenge. They're not able to share it with someone. So just by being there, a person is able to speak. And once it is out, it's just like they need to be heard. That's many times that is the problem. And once it is out there, it's the major challenge is done.
Yeah. Get it out of here and into here and out there, right? That's a very powerful tool. And it's something I work with my clients all the time, which is getting our thoughts out of here and expressing them out there. So, yeah.
And this needs to be out there for the viewers, because there is no such content on YouTube. And this would provide a real value for them. These are real questions, what they have in mind. And by watching this, if their doubts get cleared and they are able to take that first step, our mission here is accomplished. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. And if you guys have more questions, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah, you want to take it forward?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna kind of like clarify the survey part, is that the whole premise of our website and of our podcast is that our main audience would be like, it's like university students and like young professionals, where you're in that stage of your life where there's big things happening, big changes. And especially I think we recognize with COVID, like there is that need for support for everyone. But then our specific target audience, I guess, is those university young professional students. And so what we did is that we made up a survey with a bunch of questions, sent them out to our network, and we got obviously some data back, but we also got them to ask us questions to ask professionals as we go along with our podcast and like interview people. So that was kind of the premise of it. I feel like because we know that we did it, so we were like, oh, maybe we should catch you up on it as well.
Okay. No, fair. So if I heard correctly, some of these questions that you're asking me came from the university population.
Yeah, exactly. Some of our network. So it's a really questions are coming from everywhere, really.
Amazing.
And the statistics suggest that, just finalizing on the loneliness topic, that it is becoming increasingly prevalent, particularly in younger generations. So according to one 2019 survey, it was like 25% of adults between 18 and 27 have no close friends, and 22% have no friends at all. So what do you think is the Gen Zs, the people born after 96? Why is a part of loneliness increasing as we are progressing? Is it because of social media, increasing competition? Why is it that the Gen Zs are facing this in society? Yeah.
So it's a brilliant question. Again, I need to preface with the fact that most of my specialty is with over 18, so that would include some Gen Zs. But also I work a lot in kind of loss, grief, depression, anxiety. I don't do too much work in terms of again, that research piece, but what I can speak to is just from my experience with some of the clients that I'm working with, okay? And the thing that I'm finding and the trends that I'm seeing is social media is a huge piece of it, right? What we're showing the world out in the virtual world is more important for a lot of people than what we're showing the non-virtual world, right? And when you can live your life virtually or digitally and have friends that you communicate and contact with, whether it's on any of the social media platforms, or when you get reinforced. And when I talk about reinforcement, I'm talking about that dopamine rush in our brain that feels good when we get a like, or when we get a comment, or when we get somebody who reacts to our images or our pictures. Well, that's starting to replace the dopamine that we would get, or that feeling, that good feeling we would get when we're out engaging with other humans, whether it's going to a movie or engaging in sports, or things like that, whatever it might be that we would do in with people. A lot of it is being replaced by social media, and I can't. There's nobody to blame here, but it's so part of the culture now. And so the question is, how do we find balance between, because you can't just eliminate social media. I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons to it. There's a lot of pros to it. I mean, the fact that we're able to reach so many people is thanks to social media, right? But it's about finding that balance with it. And so I don't have the answer to that, because I don't work in that area in terms of what that balance looks like. But I think it's to answer your question, I think that's a really big part of it, which is that social media connection, and that creates a new level of kind of isolation, right?
No, appreciate it. Yeah, just as I said, it's casual and real information provider, so really appreciate it. And yeah, so yeah, anything from your side, Sarah?
It's honestly I think especially because like we've grown up with social media, so it's like you're saying, it's so ingrained, and it's for so long it's been like such a big part of like how you do find those connections, and like how you do maintain those connections as well. Like I know even just going to university, like keeping in contact with some of your older friends that go to school in different provinces, like all of that, I wouldn't say it's like, it's definitely like there is a real sense of community, like you were saying, like there's definitely a really good positive side, but it is like that balance of like recognizing and that self-awareness of like, oh no, this part of it is not working for me. And I feel like going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like understanding when you need to take a break, understanding things that can be like more negatively impact the way that you're perceiving yourself, perceiving others, or just like it's just a general it could be a draining experience, to be honest. So like just social media in general. So I can see how that relates to just you're like there's so much happening in your phone, and then you step out and you're like, okay, you don't see anything concrete. And I guess I can see how that kind of conflict or that perception could differ for sure.
Yeah, totally. There's the virtual world, and then there's different worlds, right? I mean, we have our work world, we have our school world, we have our family world, we have the social media world, right? And when one takes over more than the other part, well, then we need to kind of say, okay, how do we bring in the other parts and help them fit in to our overall world, right?
There's a very famous meme, you would say. It's like three bubbles and saying work, sleep, and society. You could choose only two.
You can only choose two.
Yeah,
That's a good one. Yeah.
So now like final few questions about therapy, because it's been over a decade. You've seen clients from all walks of life, how it is. So to eliminate the stigma for therapy, so in our research, we found there are three main stigmas when it comes to therapy. It's first is the men's. They're supposed to be tough and they should know how to handle their feelings first. Second is the judgment, the worry of what others would think if they come to know that we are going to therapy. And and final is like therapy in general has a negative stigma. It's like I'll quote some messages like the survey answers respondents like I'm not so weak that I would go to therapy. I don't like the idea of paying for therapy. So, three stigmas. What do you think? How do we normalize, right? Like it's okay for men. It's okay if others think. Like, and there's no point of weakness. It's like if you're going there to solve a problem, you'll come out stronger. But people need to realize this. So, what do you think about these stigmas?
So the stigmas are very real. I think those are very valid stigmas that are out there, and those are experienced by a lot of people. I hear a lot of those terms quite often that, if you go to therapy, that means you're weak. I don't know where that comes from, but that's not the case. Some of the clients that I work with are some of the strongest, most resilient people I have ever met, right? And so I don't know where that stigma comes from, but it is a very real stigma. But I'm going to try. I'm sorry, I should have had a notepad here to write these down. So, Gaurav, you're going to keep me on track here, and let me know if I miss anything, okay? But the first one I think you talked about was, men accessing mental health services, right? It is a huge problem. In my private practice, I'd say about 80% of my clients are men. And so men are accessing help. And so men are reaching out and men are coming to seek therapy, right? And so it's about taking that first step and recognizing that as men, you have emotions, you have feelings, just like everybody else on this planet, okay? And it's okay to connect with them and it's okay to share them. But therapy is not all just about feelings and how are you feeling and expressing it and all of that kind of stuff, right? A lot of the times, therapy can also be about some chaos that's up here or disorganization that's here, and then helping to navigate that. I don't want to use the word helping organize it because, an organized mind is, well, there's different thoughts about that, but it's about navigating that. And it's about recognizing that life is hard. Life is tough. We all have challenges. And so our ability to navigate those different challenges and be able to overcome those different challenges, well, sometimes we need a little bit of help and guidance to help navigate that. And therapy can really help with those kinds of things, right? Sometimes we're struggling. Sometimes, just like if you break a bone, you need to go to a doctor I don't know anybody who could put their bone back in their arm, sew it back up, and say, okay, I'm good. I don't need to go see a surgeon, right? Sometimes if we're really struggling with a mental health illness, without that help, how are we expecting to get better? And so sometimes therapy is also about recognizing that, okay, we're going through this mental health illness. I need some help to get better. Okay. And so I think there's some pretty powerful initiatives happening in Edmonton. I don't know where our listeners are tuning in from, but that are specifically talking about men's health and men's wellness issues. And so it is on people's radar. And I think the more we talk about and normalize the fact that it's okay for everybody to access mental health services, then the easier it'll become for that population to be okay with accessing help and removing that word weakness, because it is not a weakness to access help. It actually takes a lot of strength to pick up that phone or to send that email and say, hey, I need a little bit of help. Okay. Something I also tell my clients all the time is, the days you're feeling really good are also the days that therapy is really important, right? Because we learn tools to keep that momentum going, right? We're taking time to tune into our mental health and our mental wellness. We're respecting ourselves by continuing to take time to focus on us, right? So that's what I have to say about that first one. The second one I think you mentioned was cost. And people don't like paying for therapy. Is that the second one there?
Yeah, second one, yeah, we can proceed with that.
Okay. So the cost is prohibitive. Yes, I agree. So it's prohibitive in certain aspects. So people who have access to extended health benefits, depending on the province you're in, I can only speak for Alberta, but in Alberta, if you do have extended health benefits that cover mental health, well, then that opens up the door to be able to access the private sector. Because a lot of mental health, to get into the private sector, most people are charging anywhere from, well, it ranges, but from $150 to over $200 an hour for per session. That's a lot of money for people to access. So here's my tips: is check into your extended health benefit provider, see if you have coverage. A lot of people don't recognize that they do have coverage, and so check into it. If you do have coverage, use it, because that's why it's there. Second thing is ask the person you're talking to if they have a sliding scale for therapy. A lot of psychologists or counselors or therapists will have a sliding scale, and which means that you'll pay a reduced amount per session. And so there's no harm in asking about that sliding scale, right? And see if you can access it there. The other piece of it is there's a lot of really good community-based agencies that are doing some amazing work and that are able to offer community-based resources or community-based mental health services for people in the community, whether that's single session drop-in counseling, whether that's 8 to 10 sessions. There's a lot of good organizations that are offering that. The only, sometimes they have a little bit of a waiting list to kind of access. But put your name on that waiting list, because the thing about lists is that they get checked off, right? So your name will eventually make it to the top and you'll be able to access those services. Some of them are free, some of them are like $10 a session. And so it's much more accessible once you can access those. But accessibility is huge. I do agree it's a problem across the country.
But this is really insightful information, because many of them did not know about this. And
yeah. And so, sorry, what was the other? You have to remind me on the other ones that I missed there.
Final was judgment, like worrying what others would think, worrying what others might get to know about it, and these things.
So the worry piece is huge, and so there's two pieces to that. There's multiple pieces to that, but a lot of times it's about what are my family and friends going to think of me that I'm accessing a psychologist. So the piece of that is, how do you create boundary and safety around that for you? Okay, so that's something you can actually talk about with your psychologist and say, this is the worry that I have. How can we create some safety around that? So if other people find out, or when other people find out, how can we create safety around that? And the reason why I don't want to give some specific boundaries now is because it's going to be different depending on the context and depending on the environment that the person's in. Okay, so that's the first piece. The second piece of judgment is, what is my psychologist going to think about me, right? What are they going to think of me if I disclose what I'm going through? Okay, and so that's where the work comes on our end. As a therapist in the room, as a psychologist in the room, I have to make sure that I'm creating that safe, comfortable environment so that my clients don't feel that judgment. And if they do, well, what do? We actually talk about it. I call it out in session and we verbalize it. Because one thing in therapy is that we talk about the challenging things. And so if we're able to talk about that stigma, then we reduce the power that judgment or stigma has, right? By simply verbalizing it. So if you're ever worried that your psychologist has judgment or stigma towards you, call it out, talk about it, mention it. Sometimes we don't know that you're feeling that way or that you feel like we're judging you, right? So talk to us. We don't bite. We're not that scary. Okay, we're just as human as you are. But that leads me to the last piece though too, which is fit. Fit is really important. And so if you're going to seek a mental health therapist or a specialist, fit is really important. I recognize that I'm not going to be the best fit for all my clients. And so I've had clients who come see me and they say, nope, Al's not the guy for me. Great, that's okay. Let's find someone who is a better fit for you, right? And then I have other clients who I am a good fit for them. And so fit is really important, especially when it comes to mental health, right? Because everybody's mental health issues and concerns are different. And so to expect a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work that way when it comes to psychology and to mental health. And so find someone that you like, find someone that you fit with and that you connect with. And the question I often get is, how do we know? Listen to your gut. Listen to what's in here. What is after that first session, after the first few sessions? Are you feeling that safety? Are you feeling that comfort? Are you feeling like this has some potential? Go for it. If you're feeling like, nope, this isn't for me, maybe find someone else.
Yeah, definitely. I think also one thing I really liked that you said was just the fit being so important. And the way that I kind of like interpret that or like connect it as well as like for what I do at the Peer Support Center, it's like non-judgmental and like non-directional. And we are not like mental health professionals. And so sometimes there's not it's a bit less intimidating to just come talk to someone. That's like, obviously there's training for how to deal with certain situations, or just, you know, active, like basic active listening and things like that. But in terms of, that's why I like it so much. It's like, it is that smaller first step sometimes. And then obviously like we can help connect, but it's important to understand that it like Gaurav was saying, like just the fact that there is so much stigma with first reaching out to like a professional, and just the idea like professional can be like a little bit intimidating. But thank you for addressing all of that. And honestly, the breakdown of all of them was really insightful.
Good. Yeah, you're welcome.
Right. So yeah, and final question. So you define balanced wellness is the legacy of your father, according to our research, and you're carrying it forward. And would you like to share the mission and vision of Find Balanced Wellness, and how does it provide? Because this is the need of the hour. People have the hesitance, they have the doubts. We need to normalize this in terms of creating a healthy society. Because so would you like to share this with our viewers?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for asking about that. So yeah, you're right. My private practice is called Find Balance Wellness. And that comes from my dad, who's been, you know, an amazing human being. And he runs a catering business. He's still active and runs it out of Airdrie, Alberta. And his business is called Find Balance Foods. And the values and the morals and the ethics that my father lives by and kind of passed down to me are something that I really value and I really appreciate. And those are the values of community, of honesty, of integrity, and of helping other people. I remember my dad would tell me stories when I was a kid growing up of people who couldn't afford a meal or couldn't afford food, and it would come into his restaurant and the meals would be free for those individuals, right? I remember in particular, there was a story my dad shared with me of a young man that he had helped. And this young man was really in some financial trouble and didn't have anywhere to call home, and was really hungry. And my dad gave him all of this food and sustenance, which is, you know, a life. It's something that we all need to live, right? We need food. And about a month later, that same individual came back with a big bouquet of flowers to give to my dad. And you know, it was such a powerful moment, and I was there to kind of witness that and to see that and to see the impact and the power that had on that individual, right? And so part of my business practice and my business model is trying to make mental health and psychology and counseling accessible to members of the community. And so, you know, I do offer a sliding scale to my clients. I do some pro bono work here and there. You know, I do try and do these podcasts and try and get this information out there. And so that's kind of where Find Balance Wellness goes, is how can we create a mentally healthy community and make it accessible to everyone, all humans. Doesn't matter where you are, what color you are, or what you look like. If you're a human being, I want to be able to make that accessible to you. And so that's kind of the vision and the mission for Find Balance Wellness. And that's kind of where I'm going with things right now. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just awesome, the blessings from parents, and any guy, any person I speak to who's made it big in life, the main two values they share is integrity and humility, staying true to the craft and being humble. Yeah, and totally agree with you. And thank you for being on the podcast. And Sarah, any closing remarks?
I'm just gonna echo all the thank yous. it's a really like powerful story that you shared, and thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk and being so open about the wide range of topics that we talked about today.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for reaching out. And if anybody has any kind of questions or needs to contact me, I don't know if they'll put
Yeah.
contact info, but
You put
people
the
are more than
website link and yeah, how to contact you details in the description. And yeah, just to all the viewers who are watching this, if you are struggling to take the first step, do it, because that will only make you stronger when you're done with the process. And once you're stronger, you're able to better function and show your uniqueness to the world for which you like born. So don't be hesitant. This is very normal, and take the first step, reach out, and you will be just stronger when the process is done.
well, thank you too for the work that you're doing and kind of doing the advocacy work, right? Because you guys are doing the advocacy work. You're doing all the legwork and getting this together and putting this out there. So thank you to you both and to the rest of your team for doing all this hard work, because it is hard work, but it's good work. So well done.
Well, thank you back.